Hi. So, I've seen a lot of people complain that their game looks blurry or grainy, especially in the open world, and they notice it first and mostly on Cloud's hair, because the nature of Cloud's hair makes this very noticeable. So I parked myself here on in an open world on a big vista that has a lot of things to render, zoomed in on Cloud's hair to illustrate the problem. This is what it looks like. And I believe these complaints come from a misunderstanding of what some of the graphic settings in the game actually do. So I'm going to take you through those graphic settings and explain what they do. We're going to go in Systems, Options, Graphics, and look at Dynamic Resolution Scaling. So by default, it is at 150. What this allows the game to lower the resolution when it has trouble maintaining the frame rate that you tell it to. Maximum is the highest it will ever go, so you want that to be at 100%, because if you put that lower, that means it will never be at the resolution of your screen. And 50, the minimum, is how low it will go when it's having trouble maintaining your frame rates. So you're sacrificing image quality in order to maintain your frame rate. Now, the first thing you can do is lower your frame rate. You do not need the game to be at 120 frames per second. 60 is fine. The game plays very well at 60. It feels very fine at 60. Second thing you can do is just put both of these at 100%. That means the game will never be allowed to go lower, but the game, if you go in a vista that has a lot of details, the game's frame rate might suffer. This is mostly going to happen in the open world. The open world, if you really put yourself at an angle where there's a ton of things to render, yes, your frame rate will suffer, or your image quality will suffer. That's kind of the nature of open world games, and this one is very, very, very detailed. It's not going to be as much of a problem in combat, because combat is generally always focused on the ground or in a smaller vista. Boss fights, almost all of them are in more restrained environments, so it should not be as much of a problem in those. But this is what these options do. One more option I want to look at is the anti-aliasing method. So some people say that their picture looks grainy. This is why it's happening. So there's two settings here, TAA and TAAU. TAA is your normal anti-aliasing. It just makes the image slightly softer so that you don't see the edges on character models. TAAU adds in an AI upscaling algorithm, which kicks in when the resolution is lower to match the resolution of the screen. So I'm going to put both of these at lower, so the game will be rendered at 33% of my screen's resolution, but with the upscaling algorithm, the image does look sharper because it is being rendered at a very low resolution, and then the AI is essentially guessing what the image would look like at a higher resolution. It is not perfect. As you can see, it has a lot of trouble with Cloud's hair because the AI isn't able to understand the relationship between pixels. It just follows rules that tells it what each pixel should look like, and those rules aren't perfect. So it's going to create artifacts and graininess on certain things. Like Cloud's hair is going to have a lot of those grainy pixels, those white pixels that shouldn't be there. And as you can see, the tower in the background is flickering a little bit because the AI isn't able to accurately guess what this is supposed to look like. It's just making a best guess. So if you don't want that to happen, you need to turn that off as well. So you want these to be at 100% and TAA to be disabled, and just lower the frame rate. And if it still doesn't run at a good frame rate, which is likely if you have a mid-range graphics card, like if you have a 260 RTX or a 360 or a 460, those are mid-range. Those will not give you top of the line performance. That is why it happens. You're going to have to lower some of these settings here. That there's no magic button that will make the game look absolutely perfect in every way on your mid-range graphics card. That is just the nature of how computer graphics work. What you can do is, you can set these to like medium or low in the open world and then put them back to high when you're in a chapter in a more confined environment, because then there will be less things to render and you'll be able to make the game look prettier. You can, like, if you're fine with the settings, you can play with it. If you're fine with the upscaling algorithm, personally, I don't really like it. I think it sort of like smears, it sort of ruins the artistic intent, the artistic direction of the game to have this on. But like, I'm not your mom. You can do whatever you want with your computer. But this is what I would do. I would leave these at 100%, put this at 60, and then play with these whenever the game has trouble being rendered to see like what works best for you. One more thing I want to touch on. Some of these settings will be handled by your graphic card's driver itself. I have an AMD. I can't show you what the NVIDIA driver looks like, but like all of these, like Radeon Super Resolution, AMD Fluid, these are all things that can get applied on top of the game that are not going to be shown in the game settings, and they can affect how the game look. So you will want to go in your graphic cards like settings and changes to what you want, and then restart the game, because typically the game needs to be restarted for these settings to actually be applied. I generally disable all this stuff because it just tends to like add in layers of computing that are not actually useful. The Radeon Super Resolution, that's the same as the dynamic scaling resolution in there. That's the same idea. The motion fluid frames, I think on NVIDIA it's called frame generation. I would highly recommend you disable that, because the idea with that is that, on your on smart TVs always have the setting. Some of them call it motion smoothing, but they all have like a different name, and it makes movies look super like weird and cheap, because like movies are in 24 frames per second, and the algorithm will like generate frames to make it up to 60. This is the same idea. The frame generation, if your frame rate is low, the frame generation will generate frames in between. It will interpolate. The game isn't generating those frames. It's the graphics card, the AI in the graphics card that's like guessing what the frames would look like. The reason why I do not recommend this is because in order to know what these frames in between need to look like, it needs to have 2 frames of reference. So it will generate 1 frame and then generate a second frame and then generate all the frames in between. So you will start seeing the first frame in rendered, but you won't see the second frame that was being rendered by the game until all the other frames in between were rendered. So it creates a lag in your input, because you're seeing what the game is rendering like fractions of seconds after it's actually being rendered. There is like this thing called anti-lag. It doesn't work as well as I do not recommend. It's just going to add more layers of like uncertainty to your game. Just do not use these. It's just going to make your game function in weird ways. It's not going to be responsive. It's just not a good idea. It's also going to obfuscate the actual internal frame rate of your game. If the graphics card generates its own frames, and then you can't actually detect yourself when the frame rate is lowering, and meaning when your input would be less received less fast. Like, the game can only react to your input on the frames it generates itself. It cannot react to your input on a frame that the graphics card generated. So it's always going to have to wait for it's always going to be buffered to the next frame that the game is generating. So just disable all of these. I'm not your mom, you can do whatever you want. I'm just trying to explain to you what these do and how to make the game look the way you want it to. Just put it at 60, put both of these at 100, put these on TAA. This is what the game will look like. The frame rate might dip in open world areas and you'll have to lower the other actual, like, quality settings. That's just how computers work. There's not going to be a magical button that will make the game look perfect on your mid-range graphic card. That's just not how that works. I hope this was clear enough. If you still have questions, you can type them in the comment. I can try to answer them for you. I'm not gonna have every answer, but I hope this has been helpful.